The glass of champagne trembled in Catrienne's hand as Lord Renwick Vane's fingers closed around her wrist, his grip just tight enough to bruise beneath her silk gloves. No one else could see it. No one else would believe it if she told them. "Smile," he murmured against her ear, his breath carrying the sour sweetness of wine. "Your father is about to announce the happiest moment of your life." She smiled. What choice did she have? The ballroom of Hartwell House glittered with 500 candles, their light catching diamonds, and ambition in equal measure. Every notable family in London had gathered for the Marchioness of Hartwell's summer ball, and every single one of them was about to witness Catrienne Fairholme become the property of the man beside her. Property. That's what she would be. Lord Vane had made that abundantly clear during their 3 private meetings, each one more frightening than the last. The first time, he'd simply studied her like a horse he was considering purchasing. The second time, he'd outlined his expectations for a wife: silent, obedient, and grateful. The third time, when she dared to voice an opinion, he'd grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks that took a week to fade. And still, her father had signed the betrothal contract. Across the ballroom, she could see her mother dabbing at her eyes with performative joy. Her younger brother Brennan stood rigid beside their father, his jaw tight with an anger he couldn't express. He knew. He'd seen the bruises. But what could a 19-year-old boy do against 20,000 pounds of debt and a lord willing to pay it? "Ladies and gentlemen," her father's voice rang out, silencing the orchestra. Catrienne felt the room's attention swing toward them like a physical weight. "It is my profound honor to announce the betrothal of my daughter, Catrienne Fairholme, to Lord Renwick Vane of Carveth Manor." Applause scattered through the crowd. Polite, expected. A few whispers that she couldn't quite hear but could easily imagine. Poor girl. He's twice her age. But what a match for a family in her circumstances. Lord Vane's grip on her wrist tightened, a silent command. She raised her champagne glass, lips stretched into something that approximated happiness. This was it. In 6 weeks, she would be Lady Vane. In 6 weeks, no one would ever hear her scream. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." The voice cut through the applause like a blade through silk, deep and carrying a quiet authority that made the entire ballroom fall silent. Catrienne turned, along with everyone else, toward the speaker. He stood near the entrance, as if he'd only just arrived. Tall, dark-haired, dressed in evening clothes that were impeccably tailored and utterly unadorned. No excessive jewelry, no ostentation. He didn't need it. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame. Catrienne had never seen him before, but she heard the whispers ignite around her. Ashford. The Duke of Ashford. What is he doing here? He never attends these things. Not since his brother died. "Your Grace." The Marchioness of Hartwell swept toward him with the desperate enthusiasm of a hostess who'd just landed the most elusive guest of the season. "What an honor. We didn't expect." "The misunderstanding," the Duke continued, ignoring her entirely, his gaze fixed on Catrienne with an intensity that made her breath still, "is that Miss Fairholme cannot be betrothed to Lord Vane." The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Vane's fingers dug into her wrist until she nearly gasped. "I beg your pardon." The Duke crossed the ballroom floor with unhurried grace, the crowd parting before him like water. He stopped 3 feet from where Catrienne stood, his eyes never leaving hers. "She cannot be betrothed to you," he said to Lord Vane, though he was still looking at her, "because she is already promised to me." The champagne glass slipped from Catrienne's nerveless fingers. She had never met this man. She'd never spoken to him. She had certainly never been promised to him. And yet he was standing in the middle of the most important social event of the season, claiming her as his own, and something in his eyes told her to play along. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Vane's voice had gone dangerously soft. "I have a signed contract. Contracts can be disputed." The Duke finally looked at Lord Vane, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop, especially when they involve a prior understanding, one that predates your arrangement. Catrienne's pulse raced against her ribs. What prior understanding? There was no prior understanding. This man was a complete stranger who had just detonated a bomb in the middle of her carefully orchestrated nightmare. And yet, he was offering her a way out. "Miss Fairholme," the Duke extended his hand toward her. "I believe we should speak privately. Don't you agree?" Every rational thought in her mind screamed that this was madness. She didn't know him. She didn't know what he wanted. Trading one powerful man for another was hardly an escape. But Lord Vane's fingers were still bruising her wrist, and in 6 weeks she would belong to him completely. She pulled her hand free from Lord Vane's grip and placed it in the Duke's. The Duke led her through a side door and down a corridor lined with portraits of Hartwell ancestors who seemed to judge her with every step. His hand was warm around hers, his grip firm, but nothing like Lord Vane's crushing possession. He didn't speak until they reached a small study at the end of the hall, and even then he released her hand before turning to face her. "You can breathe now," he said. "He's not following." Catrienne sucked in air she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her wrist throbbed beneath her glove. Her mind raced with 1,000 questions, but only one emerged. "Who are you?" "Caelan Ashford, Duke of Ashford." He said it simply, without the weight most titled men gave their names. "And before you ask, no, we have never met. No, there is no prior understanding. And no, I don't make a habit of claiming strange women at social functions." "Then why?" "Because I saw your face when Vane touched you." His gaze was steady, unreadable. "I've seen that expression before. On my sister, 3 years ago, before she married a man much like him. She lasted 8 months before she threw herself from a window." The words hit Catrienne like ice water. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "So am I." He moved to the fireplace, staring into flames that weren't lit. "I was too late to save her. I won't be too late again. You don't even know me." "No." He turned back to face her. "But I know Renwick Vane. I know what he did to his first wife, though it was never proven. I know he's been through 3 estates in 10 years because servants refused to stay in his employ. And I know that in 6 weeks, if nothing changes, you'll be legally his to do with as he pleases." Catrienne wrapped her arms around herself, though the room wasn't cold. "My father owes him £20,000. The betrothal contract can be voided if another party satisfies the debt and demonstrates a prior claim." The Duke's voice was clinical, like a surgeon discussing an operation. "That's what I did tonight. I claimed you, publicly, in front of 500 witnesses. Now all of London believes we have an understanding. But we don't. No, we don't." He met her eyes. "Which brings me to my proposition." She stiffened. "If you think I'll simply trade one cage for another, I think nothing of the sort." Something flickered across his face, annoyance perhaps, or respect. "I have no interest in marriage, Miss Fairholme. Not to you, not to anyone. What I'm offering is a temporary arrangement, a performance." "A performance," she repeated slowly. "For the remainder of the season, you'll be my guest at Ashford House. We'll appear together at social events, allow society to assume a courtship is developing. Your family's debt will be quietly settled. Vane's claim will be invalidated." He paused. "And when the season ends, we'll part ways. You'll be free to live as you choose, with enough resources to ensure you never have to sell yourself to another man like him." It was too good. It was impossible. It was, "What do you get from this?" The question hung between them. For the first time, the Duke looked almost uncomfortable. "My family has expectations," he said finally. "My grandmother, specifically. She's been parading eligible ladies before me since my brother died, and I inherited the title. I have no interest in any of them, but she won't relent. If I'm seen courting you, she'll have to back down, at least temporarily. So, I'm a shield. We're shields for each other." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You need protection from Vane. I need protection from well-meaning relatives who don't understand that I have no intention of continuing the family line. This arrangement serves us both." Catriane's thoughts tumbled over each other. This man, this stranger, had just upended her entire life in the span of 15 minutes. He was offering her escape, but escape into what? His house, his rules, his world. She'd be trading one powerful man's control for another's, but Lord Vane's grip had left bruises. And this man had let go of her hand the moment they were alone. "What happens when this ends?" she asked. "When the season is over and we part ways? I'll be ruined. No reputation. No prospects. You'll have references from my grandmother, who is a formidable social force. You'll have connections made during the season, and you'll have a settlement, enough to live independently if you choose, or to pursue whatever future you desire." He studied her. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Miss Fairholme. I'm offering you options." Options. When had she last had options? "Lord Vane won't accept this," she said. "He'll fight it. He'll let me worry about Vane. You don't know what he's capable of. Neither does he know what I'm capable of." The Duke's voice went cold, and for a moment, Catriane glimpsed something dangerous beneath his controlled surface. "I've spent 3 years waiting for an opportunity to destroy him. You've just given me one." Before she could respond, the door burst open. Brennan stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his young face flushed with fury and fear. Behind him, she could see Lord Vane approaching down the corridor, flanked by her father. "Catriane," Brennan gasped. "He's coming. He's demanding. Let him demand." The Duke stepped forward, positioning himself between Catriane and the door. "Miss Fairholme, I believe it's time to make our arrangement official. Will you accept my protection?" Lord Vane appeared in the doorway, his handsome face twisted with rage. "This is absurd. She's mine. The contract—" "The lady hasn't answered yet." The Duke didn't even look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Catriane, waiting. She looked at Lord Vane, at the fury barely contained behind his civilized mask, at the promise of pain in his cold, gray eyes. She looked at her father, whose desperation had sold her to a monster. She looked at Brennan, whose fists were clenched helplessly at his sides. And she looked at the Duke of Ashford, a stranger offering her the first choice she'd had in months. "Yes," she said, "I accept." Lord Vane's face went pale with fury. "You can't do this." I believe she just did. The Duke turned at last to face him, and his voice carried the casual authority of a man who had never been refused. "The lady has accepted my protection. Any prior claims are hereby nullified." "Prior claims?" Vane stepped into the room, his fists clenched at his sides. "I have a signed contract. Her father signed a debt agreement that included marriage as a condition of payment." The Duke cut him off with surgical precision. "I intend to satisfy that debt by morning, without the marriage clause, which means your claim evaporates, Lord Vane. You can't simply—" "I can." The Duke's voice dropped to something quiet and frightening. "I can, and I will, unless you'd like to discuss this further in front of the 500 guests who just witnessed you lose your betrothed to me." The silence stretched like a blade. Catriane watched Vane's face cycle through rage, calculation, and finally, a cold mask of control that unsettled her more than his anger. "This isn't over," he said softly. "It very much is." The Duke gestured toward the door. "I believe you know the way out." For a long moment, Vane didn't move. His eyes found Catrayan's, and in them she saw a promise, a vow. This wasn't over. Not for him. Not ever. Then he turned and strode from the room, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like a warning. Her father remained in the doorway, his face ashen. "Catrian, what have you done?" "She secured her future," the Duke answered before she could speak. "Which is more than you managed, Mr. Fairholme. I'll have my solicitor contact you tomorrow regarding the debt. You'll find my terms considerably more favorable than Lord Vane's." Her father's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Catrian, at the Duke, at Brennan, who stood with his arms crossed and his face set. "Go home, father," Brennan said quietly. "Take mother. I'll see Catrian safely settled. But go." It was perhaps the first time Catrian had ever heard her younger brother give their father an order, and it was certainly the first time she'd seen their father obey. When the door closed behind him, she sagged against the nearest chair. "Breathe," the Duke said again. "The worst is over." "Is it?" She laughed, though nothing was funny. "I've just escaped one arrangement by entering another, with a man I met 10 minutes ago. Which is why we need to establish terms." He moved to the desk, producing paper and pen as if he'd planned this all along. Perhaps he had. "You're not my prisoner, Miss Fairholme. You're my partner in this arrangement. That means you have a voice in how it proceeds." She stared at him. "You're serious?" "Entirely." He sat, pen poised. "Tell me what you require." Catrian's mind raced. This man, this Duke, was asking for her terms, treating her like an equal despite every social convention that said she was anything but. It was either genuine respect or an elaborate trap. But what did she have to lose? "First," she said slowly, gathering her courage, "I want my family protected, not just from the debt, but from Lord Vane's retaliation. He won't accept this quietly. Already planned. Your family will have my protection for the duration of our arrangement and beyond. Vane won't dare move against anyone under my influence." She nodded, emboldened. "Second, I want to know everything. No secrets about what this arrangement truly involves, no surprises, no hidden expectations. If there's something you haven't told me, I want to hear it now." The Duke set down his pen. "Fair enough. Here's what you should know. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, will not welcome you. She has her own candidates in mind for my future wife, and you are not among them. She'll test you, possibly torment you. I'll mitigate what I can, but you should be prepared. I've survived worse than a disapproving grandmother." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. "I believe you have. What else?" "Third," she met his gaze directly, "when this ends, I walk away clean. No obligation to you, no debt of gratitude hanging over me, no expectation that I'll remain in your orbit. I want complete independence. You'll have it. And fourth," she hesitated, then pressed forward, "I need to know why. Truly. You said your sister died, that you wanted revenge on Vane. But there's more, isn't there? You're not doing this for pure altruism. What do you actually want?" The room went silent. The Duke rose from the desk and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened gardens below. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of its careful control. "My sister Margot was 19 when she married Lord Ashworth. He was charming, wealthy, connected, everything a girl could want." He paused. "Within 3 months, she stopped visiting, stopped writing. The servant said she'd become clumsy, always covered in bruises from falls." Catrian's chest tightened. "I confronted Ashworth. He laughed at me, told me a wife was property, and I should mind my own affairs. The Duke's voice hardened to steel. 2 months later, she was dead. They called it an accident, a fall from her bedroom window. But I saw her face the last time I visited. I know what despair looks like. He turned to face her. I couldn't save her. I've lived with that for 3 years. When I saw you tonight, saw Vane's hand on you, saw that same expression in your eyes. He stopped, his jaw hardening. I won't watch it happen again. Not when I can prevent it. The silence between them felt different now. Heavier. More honest. So this is about redemption, she said quietly. Saving me because you couldn't save her. Perhaps. He held her gaze. Does that change your answer? Catrienne considered. He was using her, yes, but she was using him too. And his reasons, painful as they were, felt true. This wasn't a man seeking to control her. This was a man seeking to atone. No, she said finally. Doesn't change my answer. Then we have an agreement. She crossed to the desk, taking the pen he'd abandoned. We have an agreement. There's one more thing. Brennan stepped forward, his voice hard. If you hurt her, if this arrangement becomes another cage, I'll find a way to make you pay. Duke or not. Kaelin studied her brother with something that looked almost like approval. Noted. Though I think you'll find your sister is more than capable of making me pay herself. Catrienne signed her name beneath his, sealing a bargain built on trust rather than ink. Tomorrow morning, the Duke said, a carriage will arrive for you. Pack only what you need. The rest can be replaced. And tonight you return to the ball. We appear together. We let society see that this is real. He offered his arm. Can you manage that? She thought of Lord Vane somewhere in that ballroom, watching and waiting. She took the Duke's arm. Watch me. The carriage arrived at precisely 9 o'clock, as promised. Catrienne had spent the night sleepless, alternating between terror and something dangerously close to hope. She'd packed a single trunk with her most practical belongings, 2 day dresses, 1 evening gown, her mother's pearl earrings, and the small leather journal where she'd recorded every dark thought she couldn't speak aloud. Her mother had wept. Her father had refused to look at her. Only Brennan had embraced her at the door, whispering fiercely in her ear, "If he hurts you, send word. I'll find a way." Now she sat in the Duke's carriage, velvet cushions beneath her, watching London transform outside the window. The cramped streets of their modest neighborhood gave way to wider avenues, then to squares lined with pristine townhouses, and finally to a part of the city she'd only ever glimpsed from a distance. Ashford House rose before her like a palace from a fever dream. 4 stories of pale Portland stone, columns framing an entrance that could swallow her family's entire home. Windows gleamed in the morning light, each one larger than any she'd ever looked through. A circular drive swept toward marble steps, where footmen in midnight blue livery stood at attention. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Catrienne didn't move. "Miss?" The footman's voice was carefully neutral. "We've arrived." She forced herself to breathe, to remember that she'd chosen this, that whatever waited inside was better than Lord Vane's cold gray eyes and crushing grip. She stepped out of the carriage. The entrance hall alone could have housed a ball. Black and white marble floors stretched toward a grand staircase that curved upward like a promise. Portraits of Ashford ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following her with aristocratic assessment. Fresh flowers, hothouse roses in crystal vases, perfumed the air with sweetness that felt almost aggressive. Miss Fairholme. A woman's voice, warm but professional. "Welcome to Ashford House." The speaker descended the staircase with measured grace. She was perhaps 40, handsome rather than pretty, with auburn hair streaked silver at the temples and intelligent hazel eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Catrienne in a single glance. "I'm Mrs. Thornwood, the housekeeper. His Grace asked me to see you settled." She gestured toward the stairs. "If you'll follow me." They climbed past the first floor, which Mrs. Thornwood identified as containing the formal reception rooms, and the second floor, which held the family's private apartments. Catrienne's rooms were on the third floor, in what Mrs. Thornwood called the guest wing. "The Sapphire Suite," the housekeeper announced, opening a set of double doors. "His Grace thought you might find it comfortable." Comfortable was an absurd understatement. The sitting room was larger than her family's entire ground floor, decorated in shades of deep blue and cream that reminded her of summer skies over water. Silk curtains framed windows overlooking a private garden. A writing desk stood near one window, already stocked with paper and ink. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. Beyond the sitting room, she glimpsed a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed draped in midnight velvet, a dressing room, a private bathing chamber with a copper tub that gleamed in the light. "His Grace has arranged for a lady's maid to attend you," Mrs. Thornwood continued. "Her name is Pippa. She should arrive shortly with tea and refreshments." "This is too much," Catrienne heard herself say. Mrs. Thornwood's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "His Grace was quite specific. He said you were to have every comfort, and that you were to be treated as an honored guest of the family." She paused. "He also said you might feel overwhelmed, and that I should remind you that you're free to explore the house and grounds as you wish. You're not a prisoner here, Miss Fairholme." The words hit harder than they should have. "Thank you," Catrienne managed. Mrs. Thornwood nodded and departed, leaving her alone in the most beautiful room she'd ever occupied. She crossed to the window and looked down at the garden. Roses climbed trellises. A fountain sparkled in the center of a circular lawn. Gravel paths wound between hedges, trimmed to geometric perfection. It was lovely. It was luxurious. It was utterly foreign. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Fairholme?" A young voice, nervous but cheerful. "I'm Pippa. Mrs. Thornwood sent me up with tea." Catrienne opened the door to find a girl of perhaps 17, freckled and bright-eyed, carrying a tray laden with tea service and an assortment of pastries that would have fed her family for a week. "Come in," Catrienne said, stepping aside. Pippa bustled past her, setting the tray on a table near the fireplace with practiced efficiency. "I've been assigned as your lady's maid, miss. I know I'm young, but I'm ever so good with hair. And Mrs. Thornwood says I have steady hands for buttons and laces." She glanced up, suddenly uncertain. "That is, if you'll have me." There was something vulnerable in the girl's expression, something that reminded Catrienne of herself years ago, before Lord Vane's shadow had fallen across her life. "I'd be glad to have you, Pippa." The girl's face lit up. "Oh, wonderful. I've laid out a day dress for you. His Grace had several delivered this morning from Madame Rochelle's. I hope the sizes are right. There's to be a fitting this afternoon for more. But he wanted you to have something proper immediately. Proper. As if her own clothes were improper. As if everything about her old life was something to be corrected." Catrienne pushed down the flicker of resentment. He was helping her. This was kindness, not criticism. Wasn't it? "Miss?" Pippa was watching her with concern. "Are you all right?" "Yes. Yes, I'm fine." She summoned a smile. "Just adjusting. It's all rather much." "I imagine it is." Pippa poured tea with surprising grace. "When I first came to Ashford House, I cried every night for a week. Everything was so grand, so perfect. I kept waiting for someone to realize I didn't belong and toss me out. What changed? I stopped waiting." Pippa handed her a cup. "Eventually, I realized no one was coming to toss me anywhere. So I decided to belong anyway." Simple advice, perhaps the best she'd received. She was still contemplating it when another knock came at the door. This one sharper, more imperious. Pippa's face went pale. "That'll be her grace," she whispered. "The Dowager Duchess. Mrs. Thornwood said she'd want to see you." "So soon?" "She never waits, miss." Pippa was already moving toward the door. "She says waiting is for people without power." The door opened before Pippa could reach it, and Catriane found herself face to face with the woman who could destroy everything. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford did not enter a room. She claimed it. She was tall, silver-haired, dressed in widow's black that somehow managed to look more elegant than any colored silk. Her eyes were the same piercing blue as her grandson's, but colder, sharper, like chips of winter ice, set in a face that had forgotten how to smile. She looked at Catriane the way Lord Vane had looked at horses. "Leave us," she said to Pippa, who fled without a backward glance. The door clicked shut. Silence stretched between them, heavy as velvet. "So," the Dowager said at last, "you're the girl who's entangled my grandson in scandal." "Your Grace." Catriane curtsied, grateful for years of her mother's instruction. "I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting." "Do you?" The Dowager moved further into the room, examining it as if checking for dust. "I rather think you're delighted with the circumstances. A nobody from nowhere, suddenly installed in one of the finest houses in London. What a remarkable stroke of fortune." "Fortune had nothing to do with it." "No?" The older woman turned to face her fully. "Then enlighten me. What possessed my grandson to publicly claim a girl he's never met? What hold do you have over him?" "None." Catriane kept her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "His Grace acted on his own initiative. I was as surprised as anyone." "I doubt that very much." The Dowager sat, uninvited, in the finest chair, arranging her skirts with practiced precision. "I've made inquiries. Your father owes £20,000 to Lord Vane. Your family is barely clinging to respectability. And now, miraculously, you've escaped a betrothal to a wealthy lord by catching the attention of a duke." Her smile was thin as a blade. "One might almost call it convenient. One might almost call it survival." The words escaped before Catriane could stop them. She saw the Dowager's eyes narrow and pressed on, knowing silence would damn her more than honesty. "Lord Vane is not what he appears. Beneath the charm, beneath the wealth, there's something cruel, something dangerous. I have bruises fading on my wrist that prove it." She pushed up her sleeve slightly, revealing the yellowing marks where Vane's fingers had gripped. "Your grandson saw what others ignored. He offered me protection. I accepted. That's the sum of it." The Dowager studied the bruises with an expression Catriane couldn't read. "And what do you intend to do with this protection?" she asked quietly. "Secure a title? Trap my grandson into marriage? Use his guilt over his dead sister to manipulate him into—" "He told you about his sister?" "Kaelin tells me nothing, but I have eyes." The Dowager's voice hardened. "I watched him destroy himself after Margot died. 3 years of rage and grief and reckless accusations against her husband that nearly ruined our family's reputation. I will not watch him destroy himself again, chasing redemption through some girl who reminds him of his failures. I'm not asking him to save me. Aren't you?" The Dowager leaned forward. "You're living in his house, wearing clothes he purchased, protected by his name. How is that not asking to be saved?" "Because I intend to save myself." Catriane felt her own anger rising now, burning away the fear. "This arrangement is temporary. When the season ends, I'll leave with references and resources to build my own life. I have no designs on your grandson's title, his fortune, or his heart. I want only to escape a monster, and he offered me the means to do so. If that makes me a fortune hunter in your eyes, so be it. I've been called worse." The silence that followed felt different, charged, The dowager's expression shifted through something too complex to name. "You have spine," she said finally. "I'll grant you that. I've had to develop it." "Evidently." The dowager rose, moving toward the window. "Let me tell you what will happen, Miss Fairholme. You'll spend the next weeks attending events, wearing beautiful gowns, pretending to be courted by my grandson. Society will whisper. Some will be cruel. Lady Vane's friends, yes, the first Lady Vane had friends, will seek to destroy you. Lord Vane himself will not accept this gracefully. I'm aware of the risks. Are you?" The dowager turned, her eyes boring into Catrienne's. "Are you aware that my grandson hasn't been the same since his brother died? Since Margot died? He carries grief like armor, uses it to keep everyone at a distance. If you breach that armor, if you make him feel something, and then leave as you claim you intend to, you'll wound him in ways that may not heal." Something twisted in Catrienne's chest. "I have no intention of. Intentions mean nothing. Consequences are what matter." The dowager moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. "I will be watching you, Miss Fairholme. If I determine you're using him, if I see any sign that you're manipulating his grief for your own gain, I will destroy you. Not with scandal. That's too public. I'll simply ensure that every door in England closes against you. Every position, every prospect, every possibility of independence. You'll return to your father's house with nothing, and Lord Vane will be waiting." The threat hung in the air like poison. "Do we understand each other?" the dowager asked. "Perfectly." Catrienne met her gaze without flinching. "And do you understand that I've faced worse threats than yours? Lord Vane promised me a lifetime of pain if I displeased him. At least your consequences have an end point." Something flickered across the dowager's face. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of respect. "We'll see," she said, and swept from the room. Catrienne waited until the door closed, until the footsteps faded down the corridor, before she allowed herself to sink into a chair. Her hands were shaking. The dowager thought she was a fortune hunter, a manipulator, a threat to her damaged grandson. Lord Vane was still out there, nursing his wounded pride. And somewhere in this enormous house, a man she barely knew held her entire future in his hands. She thought of Pippa's words. "Eventually, I realized no one was coming to toss me anywhere. So I decided to belong anyway." Could she do that? Could she belong in a world that saw her as an intruder? She didn't know, but she was going to try. 3 days passed before Catrienne saw the Duke again. She spent the time exploring her gilded cage, learning its rhythms and rules. Breakfast was served at 8 in a morning room flooded with light. Luncheon appeared in her sitting room if she didn't venture downstairs. Dinner was formal, served in a dining room that could seat 40, though she ate alone more often than not. The dowager took her meals in her own apartments. The Duke, according to Mrs. Thornwood, was occupied with estate business and parliamentary duties. He rose before dawn and worked until midnight, barely pausing for food that was sent to his study. "He's always like this," Pippa confided, while arranging Catrienne's hair on the third evening. "Mrs. Thornwood says he got worse after the old Duke died. That's his brother. Lord Ashton, he was. Hunting accident. 2 years passed. Then Lady Margot." She trailed off, biting her lip. "I know about Lady Margot," Catrienne said quietly. "Then you know why he's the way he is." Pippa's hand stilled. "All that loss, it changes a person." Catrienne thought of her father, how he'd retreated into silence after his business collapsed. Loss did change a person. But did it have to change them forever? That night, unable to sleep, she ventured downstairs. The house was different after midnight, quieter, emptier, the grandeur softened by shadows. She'd discovered the library on her second day, a cavernous room spanning 2 floors, connected by a spiral staircase, filled with more books than she'd seen in her entire life. During daylight, servants moved through constantly, and she'd felt watched. But now, in the small hours, she could explore freely. She was climbing the spiral staircase, reaching for a volume on the upper gallery, when a voice from below made her freeze. You couldn't sleep either. Catriane turned to find the Duke standing in the doorway, still dressed in evening clothes, though his cravat was loosened, his dark hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Your Grace. She descended the stairs quickly. I apologize. I didn't realize anyone. This is your home for the season. You don't need to apologize for using it. He moved into the room, and she noticed the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Though I'm curious what draws you to the library at 2 in the morning. I could ask you the same. Fair point. He crossed to a cabinet near the fireplace, withdrawing a decanter and 2 glasses. Brandy? I don't usually. Neither do I. Usually. He poured 2 measures anyway and held one out to her. But unusual circumstances call for unusual remedies. She accepted the glass, feeling the warmth of the brandy even before she tasted it. They stood in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. My grandmother visited you, he said. It wasn't a question. She did. And she threatened to destroy you if you hurt me. Catriane blinked. How did you? Because that's what she does. Something that might have been affection colored his voice. She's protective in her way. Frightening, but protective. I hope she wasn't too vicious. She was exactly as vicious as she needed to be. Catriane sipped the brandy, let it burn down her throat. She loves you, that's clear. She's simply afraid I'm another threat. And are you? The question was quiet, serious, stripped of the careful formality he'd maintained until now. In the firelight, he looked younger, more vulnerable, less a duke, and more a man carrying burdens too heavy for one person. I don't know what I am, she answered honestly. A week ago, I was about to become Lord Vane's property. Now I'm living in a palace, drinking brandy with a duke at 2 in the morning, and wondering when I'll wake up back in my old life. This isn't a dream. Sometimes it feels like one. Sometimes it feels like a nightmare. He set down his glass and moved to the fire, staring into the flames. Can I ask you something? You've earned that right. The night we met, at the Hartwell ball, what would you have done if I hadn't intervened? She considered lying, offering something noble about acceptance or duty, but he'd been honest with her, painfully so. He deserved the same. I had a plan, she said quietly. The night before my wedding, I was going to take the laudanum my mother keeps for headaches. All of it. Just go to sleep and not wake up. The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't face it, she continued, the words spilling out now that she'd started. The idea of belonging to him, of having no escape, no end. Death seemed kinder, so I was going to choose it. When she finally looked at the Duke, his face had gone pale. Catriane, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her given name. I didn't. I knew it was bad. But I didn't realize. How could you? You saw bruises and desperation. You couldn't have known the rest. She finished her brandy, set down the glass. But that's why I accepted your offer so quickly. It wasn't calculation or fortune hunting. It was survival. You offered me a reason to live. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Then live, he said fiercely. Not for me, not because of what I offered, but because you deserve to. Whatever happens after this season, whatever choices you make, live. Air vanished from her lungs as tears threatened to fall. Why does it matter so much to you? Because I couldn't save my sister. Because I saw the same darkness in your eyes that I saw in hers. Too late. Because He stopped, his face tightening. Because some part of me died when Margot died, and watching you survive what she couldn't might be the only thing that brings it back. They stood there, two damaged people in a firelit library, separated by class and circumstance, but bound by something neither could name. "I'm sorry," Catrienne whispered. "About your sister, about your brother, about all of it. I'm sorry, too." His voice was rough. "For the life you should have had, for the choices that were taken from you, for every moment you spent believing death was preferable to your future." She reached out slowly and touched his hand. He didn't pull away. "Perhaps," she said softly, "we can stop being sorry and start being something else instead." Something else? Allies, partners, people who choose to survive together, even when surviving seems impossible. His fingers curled around hers, warm and solid and real. "I think," he said, "I'd like that very much." They stayed in the library until dawn crept through the windows, talking about books and losses and the small moments that made life bearable. When they finally parted at the foot of the stairs, Catrienne felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, fragile, and undeniable. And she wasn't sure if it would save her or destroy her. The Thornberry Ball was the event of the season, and everyone who mattered would be watching. Catrienne stood before the full-length mirror in her dressing room, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Madame Rochelle had outdone herself with the gown, deep burgundy silk that caught the light like liquid wine, cut daringly low across the shoulders, fitted through the bodice before cascading into a skirt that whispered with every movement. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement of curls, threaded with tiny garnets that sparkled like drops of blood. She looked powerful. She looked beautiful. She looked like someone who belonged. "His Grace is waiting in the entrance hall," Pippa announced, unable to hide her excitement. "Oh, miss, you're going to steal every eye in the room." "That's precisely what I'm afraid of." She descended the staircase to find Kaelin waiting, dressed in formal black evening clothes that made him look like something carved from shadow and moonlight. His eyes tracked her approach with an intensity that made her lungs seize. "You look—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "Formidable." She laughed despite her nerves. "Is that a compliment?" "The highest I can offer." He extended his arm. "Are you ready to face the wolves?" "No. But let's do it anyway." The carriage ride was brief, but Kaelin used it to prepare her. Lady Thornberry is a gossip, but not malicious. Her husband is harmless, mostly interested in his hunting dogs. The Sinclair twins will try to befriend you. Let them. They're useful allies. Avoid Lady Pemberton. She was close to the First Lady Vane, and will likely be hostile. And Lord Vane himself? Kaelin's face hardened. He'll be there. He wouldn't miss the opportunity to watch you fail. What if I don't fail? Then we'll have exceeded his expectations. His hand found hers in the darkness of the carriage. Whatever happens tonight, remember, you're not alone. The Thornberry mansion blazed with light, carriages queuing down the street to deposit their glittering passengers. When their carriage reached the entrance, Catrienne heard the footman announce them with barely concealed interest. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, Miss Catrienne Fairholme. Every head turned. The whispers began immediately, a rustling tide of curiosity and judgment that followed them as they descended into the ballroom. Catrienne kept her chin high, her hand steady on Kaelin's arm, her expression serene despite the thundering of her pulse. You belong here, she told herself. You decided to belong. Ashford, a portly gentleman with magnificent whiskers, approached, beaming. Haven't seen you at one of these things in ages. And who is this lovely creature? Lord Thornberry, may I present Miss Catrienne Fairholme, Miss Fairholme, our host, the Viscount Thornbury." "Charmed, charmed." Lord Thornbury seized her hand and pumped it enthusiastically. "Heard all about you, my dear. Quite the romantic story, what? Ashford swooping in to rescue you from that dreadful Vane business. Very gallant. Very gallant indeed." "His Grace is nothing if not gallant," Catrienne murmured, and saw Kaelin's lips twitch. They moved through the crowd, Kaelin making introductions with the ease of someone who'd been navigating these waters since birth. Some faces were friendly. The Sinclair twins, golden-haired and mischievous, immediately adopted her as their new favorite person. Others were cold. Lady Pemberton looked through her as if she were invisible, while her companions whispered behind their fans. Then the crowd parted, and Lord Renwick Vane stepped into their path. He was smiling. That was the worst part. That charming, handsome smile that had fooled everyone, that had nearly destroyed her. "Your Grace." He bowed to Kaelin, then turned that smile on Catrienne. "Miss Fairholme, how delightful to see you again. I trust you're enjoying your stay at Ashford House." "Very much." She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "The accommodations are exceptional." "I imagine they are, though I confess I find myself curious about the nature of your arrangement." His eyes glittered with malice poorly concealed. "Society has such interesting theories." "Society usually does." Kaelin's voice was ice. "Was there something you wanted, Vane?" "Merely to offer my congratulations, and to remind Miss Fairholme that debts, once incurred, have a way of coming due." He bowed again. "Enjoy the evening." He vanished into the crowd, leaving poison in his wake. "Don't let him see you shake," Kaelin murmured. "That's what he wants." "I'm not shaking." It was almost true. "I'm plotting." "Plotting what?" "Haven't decided yet. But it will be devastating." Something warm flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration. Before he could respond, the orchestra began a waltz, and he offered his hand. "Dance with me?" She took his hand, and he led her onto the floor. Dancing with Kaelin was nothing like the stiff, formal instruction she'd received as a girl. He moved with fluid grace, guiding her through turns and sweeps until she stopped thinking about steps entirely and simply moved with him. "They're watching," she said. "Let them." "What do they see?" "A woman who refused to break. A woman who chose herself over survival." His hand tightened at her waist. "A woman who unsettles half the people in this room and doesn't even know it." "I'm not unsettling." "No?" "You walked into the lion's den wearing their blood as a gown and smiled like you owned the place. That takes a particular kind of courage." The music swelled, and he spun her through a turn that left her breathless. "I couldn't do it without you," she admitted. "You could. You would have found another way." His gaze held hers. "I merely made it easier." When the waltz ended, they stood for a moment in the center of the floor. The world shrunk to the space between them. Then the spell broke as Lady Thornbury descended, demanding introductions to Ashford's mysterious lady, and the evening's work resumed. But something had changed between them. Something neither of them could take back. It was near midnight when Catrienne slipped away to the retiring room, needing a moment to breathe. The evening had been exhausting. Hours of smiles and conversation and navigating treacherous social waters. Her face ached from the effort of appearing calm. She was adjusting her gloves when the door opened, and 3 women entered. Lady Pemberton, and 2 others, whose names she didn't know but whose expressions she recognized. Predators, circling prey. "Miss Fairholme." Lady Pemberton's voice dripped false sweetness. "What a surprise to find you hiding in here. I'd have thought you'd be making the most of your moment in the sun." "Just catching my breath." Catrienne met her gaze steadily. "The ballroom is rather warm." "Is it?" "I hadn't noticed. But then, some of us are accustomed to grand events." Lady Pemberton moved closer, her companions flanking her. "Tell me, how does it feel? Playing dress-up in borrowed finery, pretending to be something you're not? I wouldn't know. Everything I'm wearing was purchased specifically for me. With someone else's money," one of the other women sneered. "We all know what you are, a fortune hunter who got lucky. Do you?" Catrienne refused to step back, refused to show weakness. How fascinating. And here, I thought I was a woman who escaped a monster. Perhaps we're both wrong. Monster? Lady Pemberton laughed. Lord Vane is one of the most respected men in London. His first wife adored him. His first wife is dead. Silence crashed through the room. How dare you? Lady Pemberton's face had gone white. Elspeth was my dearest friend. Her death was a tragedy. Was it? Catrienne heard herself say, the words coming from some fierce place she hadn't known existed. Or was it an escape? Because I know what Lord Vane does behind closed doors. I know how he treats women who belong to him. And I know that if His Grace hadn't intervened, I'd have ended up just like her. The women stared at her in shocked silence. You don't know anything, Lady Pemberton finally spat. You're nobody, a penniless upstart who seduced a grieving duke with tears and desperation. When he tires of you, and he will tire of you, you'll crawl back to wherever you came from, and no one will remember your name. She swept from the room, her companions following. Catrienne stood alone, her pulse racing, her hands trembling now that no one could see. She had made an enemy tonight, a powerful one. But she had also found something she hadn't known she possessed, a voice, and she wasn't going to silence it again. 3 days after the Thornbury ball, Lord Vane made his move. Catrienne was in the morning room, reviewing correspondence with Mrs. Thornwood, when Pippa burst through the door, white-faced and trembling. "Miss, there's a man at the servants' entrance. He says your brother has been taken." The world stopped. "What do you mean, taken?" He wouldn't say more, just that you should come, alone, or else, Pippa's voice broke, or else something terrible would happen to him. Catrienne was moving before she'd made a conscious decision, pushing past Pippa, racing through corridors she barely knew toward the servants' wing. Her mind screamed that this was a trap, that she should find Kaelin, that she shouldn't face this alone. But Brennan's face floated before her eyes, her brother, who'd tried to protect her, who'd stood against their father, who'd sworn to find a way if she needed him. She couldn't let him pay for her escape. The man waiting at the servants' entrance was rough-looking, dressed like a laborer, with eyes that held no sympathy. "Miss Fairholme? Where is my brother?" "Somewhere safe, for now." He held out a folded paper. "Lord Vane sends his regards. You'll find instructions inside." She snatched the paper from his hand and tore it open. "My dear Miss Fairholme, your brother was apprehended this morning, attempting to investigate matters that do not concern him. Specifically, matters relating to my late wife. His curiosity is admirable, but misguided. I propose an exchange. Your brother's freedom for your return to our original arrangement. Present yourself at the address below by sunset tomorrow, alone, and he will be released unharmed. Fail to appear, and I cannot be responsible for what happens to young men who meddle in affairs beyond their understanding. I trust you'll make the sensible choice. Your devoted servant, R. Vane." The paper crumpled in her fist. "Tell your master," she said, her voice shaking with fury, "that if he harms one hair on my brother's head, I will destroy him. I will spend every moment of my life ensuring his ruin. I will—" "Miss Fairholme." The voice came from behind her, and she whirled to find Kaelin striding toward them, his face thunderous. "Step away from my guest." The messenger's nerve broke. He fled into the street without a backward glance. "What happened?" Kaelin reached her, taking her shoulders in his hands. Pippa came screaming that you'd run off. What's wrong? Silently, she handed him the letter. She watched his face as he read, watched it transform from concern to cold, terrible fury. He took your brother as leverage to force me back. She heard her voice crack. Kaylin, if Brennan dies because of me, he won't. Kaylin's grip on her shoulders tightened. I swear to you, Catriane, he won't. You can't promise that. Vane is dangerous. He's already killed one wife. And he'll answer for it. For all of it. Kaylin released her, already moving toward the main house. I know people. People who can find your brother within hours. Vane thinks he's untouchable because no one's ever had the resources to challenge him. He's wrong. But the letter says I have to go alone. If he finds out I told you, he won't find out anything except that he's made a fatal error. Kaylin stopped, turning back to face her. Do you trust me? The question hung between them. She thought of the library at midnight, of his hand holding hers, of the way he danced with her, as if she was the only person in the room. She thought of his dead sister and his broken heart, and the fierce vow he'd made to save her. Yes, she said. I trust you. Then let me handle this. Stay here where you're safe. I'll bring your brother back. I can't just wait. I can't. You can. He crossed back to her, cupping her face in his hands. You're the bravest person I've ever met. But bravery doesn't mean facing everything alone. Sometimes it means trusting someone else to fight beside you. She wanted to argue. Every instinct screamed at her to go, to find Brennan herself, to refuse to be the helpless damsel waiting for rescue. But she looked into Kaylin's eyes and saw something that stopped her protests cold. Fear. Not for himself. For her. For what would happen if she walked into Vane's trap. Promise me, she whispered. Promise me you'll bring him home. I promise. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke her. Wait for me. And then he was gone, summoning servants, sending messengers, transforming into the powerful Duke who commanded rooms simply by existing in them. Catriane stood in the corridor, the crumpled letter still clutched in her hand, and prayed she hadn't just made the worst mistake of her life. The hours that followed were agony. She couldn't eat, couldn't read, couldn't do anything except pace the length of her sitting room, imagining every terrible possibility. Brennan hurt. Brennan dead. Kaylin walking into a trap of his own. The Dowager found her near evening, still pacing, still spiraling. Sit down before you wear a hole in my carpet. I can't. I can't just. You can, and you will. The Dowager's voice brooked no argument. She guided Catriane to a chair with surprising gentleness. My grandson knows what he's doing. He spent 3 years building connections, gathering information, waiting for the right moment to move against Vane. This isn't reckless heroics. This is strategy. Vane has my brother. And Kaylin has resources Vane can't imagine. The Dowager sat across from her, her severe face softened by something almost like compassion. Did you know he hired investigators after Margot died? Spent a fortune gathering evidence of Vane's cruelty. Testimonies from former servants, medical records, financial irregularities. He couldn't use it without proof that would stand up in court, but he's been waiting. Watching. Why didn't he tell me? Because he didn't want to give you false hope. The Dowager's eyes held hers. And because he's been afraid to care about anything since his sister died. Caring means vulnerability. Vulnerability means the possibility of loss. But he does care. Yes. The word was quiet, weighted, which unsettles him more than Vane ever could. They sat in silence as the sun set outside the windows, painting the sky in shades of fire. Then, footsteps in the corridor. Running footsteps. Catriane was at the door before the Dowager could move. Kaylin stood in the hallway, disheveled, exhausted, and triumphant. and behind him, "Brennan!" She flew into her brother's arms, sobbing, laughing, and holding him so tightly she could feel his heart beating against hers. "I'm all right," he kept saying. "Kat, I'm all right. He found me. The Duke found me." She pulled back to examine him, searching for injuries. His lip was split, and a bruise was darkening on his cheekbone, but his eyes were clear, alive, whole. "Vane's men had him in a warehouse near the docks," Kaelin said. "We got there before—" He stopped, his jaw tight. "We got there in time. And Vane? Fled before we could seize him. His men are in custody, but Vane himself has disappeared." Something dark crossed his face. "He won't stay hidden for long." Katrienne stared at him. "He escaped." "For now. But we have his accomplices. We have testimony. And we have something else." Kaelin stepped closer, his voice dropping. One of his men was carrying documents, evidence that could destroy him completely. It's only a matter of time now. She didn't think, didn't weigh consequences or propriety or anything, except the overwhelming wave of gratitude and something deeper, something unnameable. She threw her arms around him. He stiffened for just a moment. Then his arms came around her, holding her close, his face buried in her hair. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "Always," he breathed back. "For you. Always." Behind them, Brennan and the Dowager exchanged a look of profound understanding. Everything had changed tonight. Nothing could undo it. In the days that followed, Katrienne learned what it meant to feel safe. Brennan stayed at Ashford House while the hunt for Vane continued, occupying a guest room near the library and spending hours in conversation with Kaelin about everything from horses to politics. The Dowager pronounced him surprisingly tolerable for a young man without title or fortune, which Brennan took as high praise. And Katrienne found herself falling. Not dramatically, not all at once. It happened in small moments. The way Kaelin looked at her across the breakfast table, a private smile playing at his lips. The way he saved books he thought she'd like, leaving them on her writing desk with notes in his precise handwriting. The way he asked her opinions and actually listened to her answers, as if what she thought mattered. One evening, a week after Brennan's rescue, she found him in the library again. He was standing at the window, staring at the darkened garden, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. "You're thinking about her," Katrienne said softly. "Margot." He didn't turn. "How did you know?" "Because you get that look. Distant. Hollow." She crossed to stand beside him. "You can talk about her, if you want. I'd like to know her." Silence stretched between them. Then slowly, he began to speak. She was brilliant. Funnier than I am, which isn't difficult. She had this laugh that could fill a room, make everyone in it feel like they were part of something wonderful. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual control. When she married Ashworth, I thought she'd found her happiness. He seemed so devoted, so perfect. I didn't see what was underneath until it was too late. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. I was her brother, her protector. I should have seen the signs, should have noticed when she stopped laughing, stopped writing, stopped being herself. Sometimes the people closest to us are the hardest to see clearly. Katrienne touched his arm. "That's not failure. That's love. Love." He said the word like it was foreign, like he'd forgotten its shape. I've spent 3 years avoiding that word, avoiding everything it implies. Because of what happened to her, because of what happened to me. He set down his glass, turning to face her fully. When Margot died, something inside me closed. I told myself it was safer that way. Caring leads to loss. Loss leads to destruction. Better to feel nothing than to feel everything and be crushed by it. Is that what you believe? It's what I believed. His eyes searched hers. Until I watched you walk into the Hartwell ballroom, wearing terror like a mask, and knew I couldn't stand by again. Until I spent 3 days away from you, and felt like I couldn't breathe. Until I held you in that corridor and realized— He stopped, his face tight with emotion. Realized what? She whispered. That I was already lost. His hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle as rainfall. Catrienne, I've tried to convince myself this is strategy, protection, obligation. But it isn't. It hasn't been for weeks. Her blood rushed in her ears. What is it then? You already know the answer. She did know. She'd been fighting the same battle, building the same walls, telling herself the same lies. This wasn't supposed to happen, she said. The arrangement. Damn the arrangement. His voice roughened. I don't want an arrangement. I don't want a performance or a partnership or any other word that keeps us safely distant from the truth. What do you want? You. The word was simple, devastating, and absolute. I want you. Not as a guest or a project or a woman I saved. As yourself. As everything you are. She should be sensible. Should remind him of the obstacles, the differences in their stations, the dowager's warnings, and the impossibility of a happy ending. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. His response was immediate, arms wrapping around her, pulling her close, mouth opening against hers, with a hunger that matched her own. This wasn't the careful, controlled Duke of Ashford. This was Kaelin, raw and real, and wanting her with an intensity that stole her breath. When they finally parted, foreheads pressed together, both breathing hard, she felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I. This could destroy us both. It could. His thumb brushed away her tears. But I'm more frightened of living without trying, of watching you walk away at the end of the season and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. Your grandmother will adjust. Society can burn for all I care. Kaelin, tell me to stop. His eyes burned into hers. Tell me you don't feel this, and I'll never speak of it again. We'll finish the season as planned. You'll leave with your references and resources, and I'll spend the rest of my life pretending I never held you in my arms. She should tell him to stop. It was the sensible choice, the safe choice. But she was done being safe. Don't stop, she whispered. Don't ever stop. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and she felt herself falling off the edge of a cliff she'd been walking toward, since the moment he'd claimed her in the Hartwell ballroom. There was no going back now. There was only forward. The happiness lasted exactly 8 days. 8 days of stolen moments, secret smiles, hands brushing under dinner tables. 8 days of believing, against all evidence, that maybe fairy tales could happen to girls like her. Then the letter arrived. Catrienne was dressing for a music hall when Pippa entered, her face stricken, holding a cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax. This came for you, miss. A messenger brought it. Wouldn't say who sent it. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but the seal, she recognized the seal. A serpent coiled around a sword, Lord Vane's family crest. She broke the seal with trembling hands. My dear Miss Fairholme, by now you believe yourself safe. You believe that justice has prevailed, that I will face consequences for my alleged actions. You believe your Duke has won. You are wrong. Enclosed, please find copies of several documents that I am prepared to release to the Times. The first is a record of your father's gambling debts, far more extensive than publicly known, incurred at establishments that cater to rather unsavory clientele. The second is testimony from servants in your household detailing your mother's addiction to laudanum, a habit that began well before your financial troubles. The third is a detailed account of your brother's activities over the past 2 years, including certain business dealings that would be classified as criminal fraud. In short, I have enough ammunition to destroy your entire family. Your father would be imprisoned for debt. Your mother would be committed to an asylum. Your brother would hang. But I am not without mercy. Leave Ashford House. End your association with the Duke. Return to the life you were meant to live, quietly and without complaint. Do this, and these documents will never see the light of day. Refuse, and I will ensure that everyone you love suffers for your defiance. You have 48 hours to decide. Ever yours, R. Vane. The letter fell from her nerveless fingers. Miss? Pippa's voice seemed to come from very far away. Miss, what's wrong? Everything. Everything was wrong. Catriane picked up the documents that had been folded inside the letter. Her father's gambling records, covered in annotations and dates. A statement from their cook describing her mother's nervous condition and reliance on medication. A list of Jonathan's business ventures, several of which she hadn't known about, detailed with names and amounts and evidence of deception. Vane hadn't been stopped. His reach extended beyond whatever hiding place sheltered him into the vulnerable heart of everything she loved. She could go to Kalen. Tell him. Let him fight this battle too. But the documents were real. The accusations, however twisted, had enough truth in them to be devastating. Her father had gambled. Her mother did rely on laudanum. Jonathan had made poor choices. If she stayed, if she let Kalen continue to protect her, Vane would destroy them all out of spite. And she wouldn't let that happen. Pippa. Her voice came out steady, though her heart was shattering. I need you to pack my things. Only what I arrived with, nothing more. Miss? Don't tell anyone. Not Mrs. Thornwood, not the Dowager, and especially not His Grace. She met the girl's horrified eyes. Please, Pippa. If you ever cared for me, do this without question. Pippa's lip trembled, but she nodded. An hour later, Catriane stood in the entrance hall with her single trunk, wearing the same dress she'd arrived in, feeling every ounce of borrowed happiness draining away. She'd written 2 letters, one to the Dowager, thanking her for her hospitality, one to Kalen. The second had taken 6 attempts. Kalen. I can't explain. Not fully. Not without putting people I love at risk. Please know that leaving is the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than facing Vane at the Hartwell ball. Harder than waiting while you rescued my brother. Harder than anything I thought I could survive. You saved me. You gave me hope when I had none. You made me believe I could be loved, truly loved, for exactly who I am. But love means protecting the people we care about, even when it costs us everything. Please don't look for me. Please don't try to understand. Just know that every moment with you was real, and I will carry those moments with me for the rest of my life. Thank you for making me brave. Yours, always and impossibly, Catriane. She left the letters on the entrance table and walked out the front door. The carriage she'd hired was waiting. She didn't look back. The journey home felt like traveling backward through time. Each mile stripped away another layer of the person she'd become at Ashford House. By the time the carriage stopped in front of her family's modest home, she was simply Catriane Fairholme again, penniless, powerless, alone. Her mother met her at the door with tears and confusion. Catriane? What's happened? We thought... The Duke. It's over. She couldn't manage more than that. Please, Mother. Just let me rest. In her old room, the smallest in the house, she lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She'd done the right thing. She'd protected her family. So why did it feel like dying? The answer came unbidden in the memory of Kalen's voice, his arms, and his lips against hers. Don't stop. Don't ever stop. She'd told him not to stop. And then she'd stopped everything. Her tears came silently, soaking into a pillow that smelled nothing like cedar or sandalwood or the library at midnight. Somewhere in London, in a house she'd never see again, the man she loved was discovering she'd gone. And there was nothing at all she could do about it. 2 days of numbness. 2 days of her mother's worried looks and her father's confused silence and Brennan's furious pacing. "He threatened you," Brennan said on the second morning. "Vane, that's why you left. I can't discuss it. You don't have to. I can read between the lines." His young face was set with determination. "I'm going back to London. I'll find the Duke, explain—" "No," Catriane gripped his arm. "You can't. If Vane even suspects I've told anyone, then what? We just let him win? We survive." The word tasted like ash. That's all that matters. But surviving, she was discovering, wasn't the same as living. On the third day, a carriage appeared outside their door. Not just any carriage. A carriage emblazoned with a familiar crest, pulled by matched black horses, driven by a coachman in midnight blue livery. Ashford. Catriane watched from her narrow window, her heart lurching, as the carriage door opened and a figure emerged. Not Kaelin. The Dowager Duchess. She descended with the regal bearing of a queen visiting occupied territory, surveyed the modest house with an expression of profound distaste, and marched toward the door. Catriane was in the parlor before the knock came. "Your Grace." She curtsied, acutely aware of the shabbiness surrounding them. "I didn't expect, clearly." The Dowager swept past her, examining the room with sharp eyes. "This is where you grew up?" "Yes." She settled into the best chair, which creaked ominously under her. "My grandson has been insufferable since you left. Worse than after Margot died. He's locked himself in his study, refused food, threatened to dismiss anyone who mentions your name." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" The Dowager's gaze pierced her. "You left without explanation. You broke whatever understanding existed between you. You reduced a man who was finally beginning to heal back to the hollow shell he was before." Each word struck like a blow. "I had no choice," Catriane whispered. "There is always a choice." The Dowager leaned forward. "I told you I would destroy you if you hurt him. I came here prepared to do exactly that. But first, I want the truth. Why did you leave?" Something cracked inside Catriane. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was simply the impossibility of carrying this weight alone any longer. She told the Dowager everything. Vane's letter, the documents, the threats against her family, the impossible choice between love and protection. When she finished, the Dowager sat in silence for a long moment. Then she laughed. "That manipulative bastard," she said, with what sounded almost like admiration. "He played the one card he knew would work. Your family, your love for them. It wasn't a bluff. Those documents are real. Of course they are. That's what makes it clever." The Dowager rose, moving to the window. "What Lord Vane failed to consider, however, is that I have documents of my own. Evidence I've been gathering for 20 years. Testimony from servants, from business associates, from women he's harmed. I never used it because I never had a reason compelling enough to risk the scandal. And now? Now?" The Dowager turned, and her smile was dangerous. "Now, my grandson is in love for the first time in his life, and some jumped-up lordling thinks he can take that away. I find I'm quite motivated." Hope flickered, dangerous and fragile. "You'd do that? Risk scandal to protect my family, which, whether you like it or not, includes you." The Dowager moved toward the door. "Pack your things. You're coming back to London." "But my parents will be provided for and protected. I have resources Lord Vane cannot imagine." She paused at the threshold. "Catriane, my grandson loves you. Despite my warnings, despite his own fears, despite every rational objection. He loves you, and I will not watch him destroy himself again because of Lord Vane's machinations. Tears stung Catrienne's eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You never wanted me with him." "No. I wanted someone suitable, someone safe. You are neither of those things." The dowager's voice softened almost imperceptibly. "But you're what he needs. I was wrong to deny that. I don't know if I can." "You can. You will." The older woman's eyes held hers. "You told me once that you'd survived worse than my threats. Prove it. Fight for him the way he's been fighting for you." Outside, another carriage was approaching, this one driven harder, faster, as if the person inside couldn't wait another moment. Catrienne's chest constricted, because she recognized those horses, recognized the figure leaping from the carriage before it had fully stopped, striding toward her door with the desperation of a man who'd lost everything and just discovered where to find it. Kaelin. He looked terrible. That was her first thought. Dark circles under his eyes, face shadowed with stubble, clothes wrinkled as if he'd been wearing them for days. Nothing like the polished duke she'd met at the Hartwell ball. He looked like a man who'd been to hell. Catrienne. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Kaelin. She didn't get to finish. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Don't ever," he said into her hair, his voice breaking. "Don't ever disappear like that again. When I read your letter, I thought I'd lost you forever. I'm sorry." She was crying now, couldn't stop. "I'm so sorry. Vane threatened my family. He had documents. I couldn't." "I know. My grandmother told me everything." He pulled back to look at her face, his hands cupping her cheeks. "She sent word the moment she arrived here. I nearly killed my horses getting here." "You shouldn't have come. If Vane finds out, Vane is finished." Something cold and satisfied flickered in his eyes. "While my grandmother was traveling here, I was in London with a magistrate. The evidence we had, combined with the testimony we gathered after your brother's kidnapping, was enough to issue a warrant. Lord Renwick Vane was arrested this morning on charges of kidnapping, assault, and conspiracy to commit murder. His assets have been frozen. His allies have abandoned him. He will die in prison." The world tilted. "Murder? His first wife. It's taken 3 years, but we finally found proof." Kaelin's face set with resolve. A letter she wrote to her sister, describing what he'd done to her, asking for help. The sister kept it hidden all these years, too afraid to come forward. But when she heard about you, about what almost happened, she found her courage. Catrienne's legs gave out. Kaelin caught her, lowering them both to sit on the worn parlor sofa, keeping her in his arms. "It's over," he said softly. "He can't hurt you anymore. Can't hurt anyone." The documents he threatened to release, my father's debts, my mother's, were gathered through illegal means and obtained by extortion. Any newspaper that published them would face prosecution. His hand stroked her hair. "Your family is safe. I promise you, they are safe." She pulled back to look at him, really look, seeing the exhaustion beneath the determination, the fear beneath the strength. "You did all this in 3 days? I would have torn down the walls of Parliament if that's what it took." His eyes burned into hers. "When I found your letter, when I realized you'd gone, I understood something. All my life, I've been afraid of loss, afraid of caring, afraid of what loving someone could cost me. I lost my brother. I lost Margot. I told myself I'd never survive losing someone again. Kaelin, let me finish." He took her hands in his. "When you left, I realized I'd already lost you, and it destroyed me. More than my brother's death, more than Margot's, because I'd had you, truly had you, and let fear steal you away. It wasn't fear that made me leave. It was love. I know. You left to protect your family. But Catrienne, he pressed his forehead to hers. Don't you understand? You are my family now. You and Brennan and your impossible parents, and everyone you care about. Protecting you means protecting them. That's not a burden. That's a privilege. The tears came harder now. I don't deserve. You deserve everything. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and the corner of her mouth, each touch reverent and achingly gentle. You deserve happiness and safety, and a life free from fear. You deserve to be loved without condition or limitation. And if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Kaylin, what are you saying? He pulled back, and his eyes were clearer than she'd ever seen them. I'm saying I love you, Catrienne Fairholm. Not because you need saving. Not because you remind me of Margot. Not because of arrangement or obligation. I love you because you're fierce and brave and kind. Because you make me want to be present instead of hiding. Because when I'm with you, I remember why life is worth living. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I'm saying I want to marry you. Properly. Publicly. With every person in London watching. So there can never be any doubt that you are mine, and I am yours. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny pearls. Simple. Elegant. Unexpected. It was my mother's, he said quietly. She told my father she didn't want something traditional. She wanted something that felt like her. I thought. He hesitated, suddenly vulnerable. I thought it felt like you. Catrienne stared at the ring, then at the man holding it, then at the dowager standing in the doorway with an expression of profound satisfaction. Your grandmother approves of this? She insisted on it. Kaylin's lips quirked. Apparently, I've been, and I quote, utterly unbearable without you. You have, the dowager confirmed. Catrienne laughed through her tears. This is mad. A week ago I was fleeing London to save my family. Now you're proposing in my mother's parlor. Is that a no? That's a... She stopped, looking at his face, at the hope and fear and love written there so clearly. That's a yes. 1,000 times yes. He kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise, while the dowager diplomatically turned away, and somewhere in the house, Brennan let out a whoop of triumph. When they finally broke apart, Kaylin slid the ring onto her finger. Perfect fit, he murmured. Of course it is. Catrienne smiled, wider than she'd ever smiled in her life. It was made for me. They called it the wedding of the decade, though Catrienne suspected scandal of the decade was closer to society's true opinion. Not because of its size, it was intimate, held in the private chapel at Ashford House with only 50 guests. Not because of its extravagance. Catrienne had insisted on simplicity, and Kaylin had happily agreed. No, it was the event of the decade because of what it represented. A duke marrying for love, a penniless woman triumphing over impossible odds, a villain brought to justice, rotting in prison while his intended victim walked down the aisle in silk and pearls. The story had spread through London like wildfire. Every newspaper carried accounts of Lord Vane's arrest, of the evidence that had finally brought him down, of the brave young woman who had escaped his clutches with the help of a duke who'd lost his own sister to similar cruelty. Public opinion, always fickle, had swung firmly in Catrienne's favor. She was no longer a fortune hunter or a nobody. She was a heroine. And today, she would become a duchess. Brennan walked her down the aisle, their parents watching from the front row. Her mother wept into a handkerchief. Her father sat straighter than she'd seen him in years, something like pride finally showing in his face. But Catrienne saw only Kaylin. He waited at the altar in wedding clothes, his dark hair swept back, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. When she reached him, and Brennan placed her hand in his. She felt the tremor in his fingers. "Nervous," she whispered. "Terrified," he admitted. "You?" "Absolutely not." His quiet laugh was soft. Private, just for her. Liar. The ceremony was brief. The vows were traditional. But when the moment came to seal their union, Kaelin cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made the entire chapel fall silent. "Mine," he murmured against her lips. "Yours," she agreed. "Always." They emerged into sunlight, into a shower of rose petals, into the cheers of servants who'd gathered to witness this moment. The dowager stood at the front, her severe face transformed by something resembling joy. "You've done well," she told Catriane as they passed, "for a merchant's daughter." "High praise," Catriane returned, "for an intimidating old woman." The dowager's laughter followed them into the waiting carriage. The wedding breakfast was lavish, the toasts were warm, and by evening, Catriane found herself in the same sapphire suite where she'd begun her journey. But everything had changed. "Duchess of Ashford," she said, testing the title on her tongue. "It sounds ridiculous." "It sounds perfect." Kaelin came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they looked out at the moonlit garden. "You sound perfect." "Flatterer?" "Truth-teller." He kissed her neck. "Though I admit, I do have ulterior motives." She turned in his arms, sliding her hands up his chest. "Oh? What sort of motives?" "The sort that require considerably less clothing." She laughed, bright and free. "Your Grace, that is highly improper. We're married now. Nothing is improper." He kissed her again, and she let herself sink into it, into him, without reservation or fear. This was real. This was hers. This was forever. And it was only the beginning. 1 year later, the garden at Ashford House was in full bloom, roses climbing trellises, lavender scenting the air, sunlight dappling through the leaves of ancient oaks. Catriane sat on a stone bench, her hand resting on the swell of her stomach, watching her husband teach Brennan the finer points of fencing on the lawn below. "Your form is atrocious," Kaelin was saying. "You drop your shoulder every time you lunge." "Perhaps my teacher is inadequate," Brennan returned, grinning. "Your teacher could best you with his eyes closed." "Prove it." The clash of wooden practice swords filled the air, accompanied by laughter and good-natured insults. Brennan had found his place here, as Kaelin's unofficial secretary, handling correspondence and investigations that required discretion. He had a talent for it, and more importantly, he had purpose. Her parents had moved to a cottage on the Ashford country estate, comfortable and provided for, finally able to rest. Her mother had abandoned the laudanum months ago, finding peace in gardening and grandmotherly anticipation. Her father had started writing, memoirs of his business years, lessons he'd learned, mistakes he'd made. He said it helped him understand his own story. And Catriane had found everything she'd never dared to hope for. "You're brooding." The dowager appeared beside her, settling onto the bench with unusual grace. "Pregnant women shouldn't brood. It unsettles the child." "I'm not brooding. I'm appreciating." The older woman followed her gaze to where Kaelin had indeed bested Brennan and was helping him up from the grass. "He's different now. Lighter. He smiles more. He laughs." The dowager shook her head in wonder. I'd forgotten what his laugh sounded like. His mother's laugh, full of joy. They sat in companionable silence, watching the two men below, one her brother, one her husband, trading jabs and laughter. "I was wrong about you," the dowager said quietly. "When you first arrived, I saw only what you lacked. Title, fortune, position. I didn't see what you had." "What did I have?" "Fire." The old woman's eyes met hers. "The same fire my daughter-in-law had. The same fire that made my son love her until his dying breath. She paused. You've given that fire to Kalen. You've brought him back to life. Catrienne felt tears prick her eyes. He brought me back to life, too. Then you saved each other. The dowager rose, brushing off her skirts. Which is, I suppose, how love is meant to work. She departed toward the house, leaving Catrienne alone with her thoughts. Kalen looked up from the lawn, catching her eye. His smile was brilliant, unguarded, and full of everything he'd once been afraid to feel. He handed his practice sword to Brennan and crossed the garden to her side. You look thoughtful, he said, settling beside her on the bench. Your grandmother just told me she was wrong about me. Alert the newspapers. That may be the first time she's admitted error in 70 years. Catrienne laughed, leaning into his shoulder. She said we saved each other. Did she? He pressed a kiss to her hair. Wise woman. I thought she was an intimidating old woman. She can be both. They sat together as the afternoon softened toward evening, his hand covering hers over her stomach, feeling the flutter of new life beneath their palms. Scared? He asked. Utterly, she admitted. Good. That means you understand how important it is. He turned her face toward his. But we'll figure it out. Together. The way we've figured out everything else. Even the impossibilities. Especially those. His kiss was gentle, full of promise. After all, we specialize in impossibilities. She thought of a ballroom months ago, of a monster's grip on her wrist, of a stranger's voice cutting through the crowd. The misunderstanding is that Miss Fairholme cannot be betrothed to Lord Vane, because she has already promised to me. He'd claimed her to save her. She'd stayed because he'd saved himself. And now, together, they would build a life neither had dared to imagine, full of laughter and tears and children and love, stretching forward into a future bright with possibility. The merchant's daughter and her duke, the impossible, made real. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.